Barack Obama is at it again. Some of the quotes are unbelievable. You know what he's saying now, as he's on his gun control push, is he's saying that mass shootings don't happen anywhere else in the world. They only happen here. So we've got to do something about it. He's also warning Putin. Obama is also warning Putin, hey, you better remember the lessons of Afghanistan. You remember what happened in Afghanistan before you go messing around in Syria. I mean, it's incredible, some of the things that he's been saying. Also, he's concerned about, of course, submerged countries if we don't fix climate change. And guess what? His Marx brother, the Pope, is right on board with him. So I wanted to bring Christy Brown with us and have her join as she does every now and then. I always enjoy having Christy. Christy, how are you?
I'm great, Burnie. Thanks for having me on.
I am so excited for you to see this interview later on because I'm talking to you on an old black handset phone. And I love it. It's my new prop for the show. And I drive around with it. It plugs in my cell phone, and you wouldn't believe all the attention I get driving around with this old black phone.
I bet. I think I've seen a picture of you using it. I think you posted that somewhere.
It's fantastic. I wanted to find out what is on your what's been on your mind lately with everything going on politically.
Well, I was in New York City for the Thanksgiving holiday. Well, right before it, we got out of there before the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. But it was amazing to see the show of police officers in New York City. And I actually overheard one of the conversations where they were talking about that they're there because Obama wanted them there, and they would literally stop traffic that was bumper to bumper and ridiculous to parade police cars down the street and turn the lights on and scare everybody to death and make everybody think there was something going on. And they called it a show of force, and it's something that Obama actually ordered the police to do in the city of New York City. How crazy is that?
A show of force to who? I mean, and that's the thing that he's done is he's brought, Christy, I never thought it would be Republicans who brought a totalitarian surveillance police state. I thought it would be the Republicans who would do that. But I've learned that it's the Democrats.
Well, they definitely aren't doing anything to prevent, some of the things that Obama is doing. We were walking down the street and I just said, where's the sheriff at? How come this is happening? How come the president, what authority does the president have to tell the police force in New York City to make traffic worse just so everybody will see that you're here? I don't understand that. I don't understand what the intention was. And what I said was, I've been in several places. I've been where the G8 and G20 was happening and where the police are in full riot gear. And I actually think that antagonizes people that maybe wouldn't do anything if they didn't see the police kind of acting really like bullies. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but there was no reason to do this other than to kind of scare the citizens of the city of New York City. Like, what would be the purpose of that?
I have a friend named Patrick. He's a friend of the show, and he has put together a terrific formulation on this. He says that one of the great problems we have in America, which is where we live now, one of the great problems that we have is that the military are acting like police throughout the world, and the police are acting like the military in America.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I saw. And, and to the detriment of the people they're supposed to be protecting, right? Because they actually prevented people from getting to where they needed to be going or even getting to work on time. They were shutting down the streets, in order to kind of make their presence known for, I guess to make Obama feel like he's able to boss the police around, which I just think is crazy. So they were actually walking around in full riot gear, so, where they had the full, like, SWAT type uniforms on and carrying around automatic weapons. So it actually was, it scared me. I didn't feel safer that these guys were there. I felt like they knew something I didn't know and that I shouldn't be there myself.
It is what Obama's doing is pretty amazing, actually, in a bad way. What he's doing is, on one hand, saying that there is an institutional racism issue among the police. He said the police have acted stupidly. He has said that there are problems within the police force across America. He gets people riled up with Black Lives Matter. and then he turns around and militarizes them. Now, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, like he makes him the bad guy and then gives the bad guy more power. Like, obviously there's a disconnect there in how he's communicating his views, but nobody calls him on it. On either side, neither side is saying you can't have it both ways. You can't say that there's an institutional problem inside the police force and then give them more power to continue on if you really believe they have that power. It makes no sense.
I just wrote a column talking about how topsy-turvy one of the biggest things about America, is that it is topsy-turvy. Everything is upside down. Mm-hmm. And I make the point that Barack Obama has the superhero power of making what used to be bizarre ordinary, number one. And he also has the ability to make his criminality and corruption seem like just politics. It's just politics. But what's even more amazing is his ability to get the other political party, Congress, the Republican Congress, not only to not check him, but also to fund his every whim. That is incredible. Why do you think they're doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is I think that they're not really sure what's politically popular. And I say that because I don't believe that the majority of Congress has any real internal values or principles that they are there to uphold on their own. And so when they stick their finger in the wind and try to decide what side to be on, they can't make a decision because they have no internal guidance. And that's what, I mean, when you talk about some of the politicians that we've discussed previously, Marco Rubio and even like Chris Christie and some of the other people that are on the national stage now, they're not really sure what they believe. So because they have no internal principles, they're going to try to figure out what's popular. And according to what the media puts out, everybody agrees with Obama. So they feel like they can't take a stand, I think, because they're not really sure what they actually believe themselves.
This is interesting. Let's make a matrix of this, Christy Brown. Let's take a look at the Republican politicians and the Democrat politicians, and then let's take a look at the Republican voters and the Democrat voters. I think you're right. I think the Republican politicians do not have principles that they are standing on. I think that the Democrat politicians do. Now, I think the Republican voters are just, I mean, they're going to vote Republican because you don't want a Democrat, do you? And the Democrat voters are going to do anything that the Democrat politicians want to do, whether it's against the Patriot Act or for the Patriot Act, whether it's against war or for war. Mm-hmm. Democrat voters are going to do anything that the Democrat politicians want to do because Democrat voters hate Republicans more than they love America.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to say it, and I think the other thing is that there's a lot of bullying that goes on inside of Washington that the public and even those that are engaged don't know about. And it's continued under Paul Ryan. We all know some of it that happened under John Boehner. To think that Paul Ryan was going to be any different is a little bit laughable. But some of the people that have stood up and said that's not the way that things are supposed to be done, like Justin Amash, were removed from their committees, which basically handicaps any ability they have to make a difference in Washington. And so then, people see that happening and they're like, well, I'm here, for my constituents, I have to have power, and so that shuts them up.
It's unbelievable. And now I look and I see the Marx brothers, Obama and the Pope is who I call the Marx brothers. And these two guys are now talking about it's now or never time for climate change. I mean, climate change is to blame for Islamic radicalization. Climate change is our biggest threat. As a matter of fact, Barack Obama just said climate change could submerge countries if we don't fix it now. And the Pope is talking about now or never, to which I say never.
Yeah, the Pope really gets confusing when he makes all kinds of statements about not allowing, religion and politics to mix because that's what plays well with the people that listen to him. But then he makes statements like this that, it's a little bit baffling to think that there's not some hidden agenda. One of the things that I did a long time ago, Burnie, I'm going to have to find it and send it to you because I think your listeners will love it. But the people that are for legislation, government intervention into climate change, regardless of who you think causes it or if it's even real or any of that, if you follow the money of the politicians who have millions of dollars to gain if they can actually get legislation passed because they own windmill mills or solar power plants or whatever the case may be, or the oil companies. GE is one of the biggest producers of clean energy and one of the biggest lobbyists to try to get clean energy passed in D.C. You follow the dollars. This has nothing to do with the health of the people. It has nothing to do with protecting the environment. It has everything to do with lining the pockets of the people in Washington.
That is exactly right. And that's why I keep saying things like it's less about Republicans versus Democrats now than it is the insiders versus the outsiders. Because if you look at Jeb Bush and you look at Hillary Clinton, these are insiders. They're more than they are Democrats or Republicans. And if a Republican watching doesn't believe me because we can't stand Hillary, and neither can you and I, Christy Brown, but we're not dumb enough to believe that you and I have more in common with Jeb Bush than Jeb Bush has in common with Hillary Clinton. It is the insiders versus the outsiders now. And that's another hallmark of America.
Well, and it seems to me like a lot of things that happen without the public really adding logic to the discussion. So, and by that I mean, so like we watch these debates, right? And we think Republicans are ganging up on the media, that evil media, you know, and people who are supporting Bernie Sanders told me that Hillary Clinton got all the questions beforehand. And what I think is so interesting is it's all a show. And I know that because I was part of some of the debate prep in 2012. All of the candidates know what they're going to be asked before the debate happens. They all have prep teams that have prepped them on what's going to happen. They all get together and decide, hey, we're going to team up on this moderator. And it's all an act to the point where if you don't think that you're part of the outsiders and you don't know that it's all an act, then you cheer these guys on when they don't answer the question and they go after the media because the next day they're going to vote the wrong way on the question they were just asked. And you pretend like that they're for you when they're actually putting on a show with all their buddies.
It is to the point, the political theater is to the point that I think everybody knows it now. I even think Democrats know it. Democrats know that there's not going to be submerged countries if they don't tax the ever-living out of rich people. They just want to tax rich people. You know, they know this. It is such a show, the political theater, which is why I don't want to play, and I've said this before, Christy, I don't want to play Let's Pretend with my government. My little daughters are already too old, for God's sake, for me to play Let's Pretend with. So I don't want to play Let's Pretend with my government. I want to live in real life. And if they're going to do political theater, here's what I propose. I think we ought to have fanfare. Every time there's a debate or every time there's a press conference, we ought to have dancing bears in bikinis. We ought to have fanfare, and we ought to Donald Trump's perfect for it, actually, if you think about it. He would be perfect. But let's stop the damn games, and let's be in real life. If we're going to have a show, let's make it a show. It's almost like the Hunger Games, but not as funny.
Oh. Yeah, I tell you what, we watched the second movie of the Hunger Games, and I can't, you know, you and I think a lot alike. When I watch those kind of things and people tell me how great these movies are, and I think we are so not that far from being that controlled from the government. Everybody looks at me like I'm crazy, and I'm like, well, now they're trying to tell you how much salt you can have in New York City. They just passed a law that you can only have so much salt at a restaurant before they have to cut you off. I mean, really not that far from saying, hey, you need to give us some of your kids to fight so that we can control you a little better.
I got to tell you, and people probably won't agree with me on this, the moment you allow the government to tell you how much you can drink, once they start to regulate the reasonable things, booze or whatever, it's not far until they get to the sodas and to the and trans fats and to the salt. And it's right. Just not. It's kind of like once we allowed the government to say we're going to have gun-free zones in schools because that sounds reasonable, it wasn't going to be long until we had gun-free zones on our military bases.
Well, what's amazing to me with with what Obama's saying with the guns and all of that, and I know everybody has said it before, but it seems like such again, it's just theater, right? Because he's guarded and his family is guarded by men with guns. So if somebody tried to make the case to me that I needed to be disarmed, then I would say, okay, you first. You lead the way. You're the leader. You're making the case, and you think everybody's perfectly safe and guns are the problem. Then, take away the guards from your children first, and then we'll have a conversation. If you're not willing to do that, you're not serious. And I don't really understand exactly how people don't see that correlation, and they'll cheer him on as he tries to disarm the public, but he has no intention of allowing men to guard his children that aren't armed. So why would he want schools that have our children in them that are disarmed. It just seems like there's a total disconnect.
There is a disconnect, and I love the you first. As a matter of fact, my next column is going to be on political reforms, real ones, and I have three in mind. One of them is the You First Amendment, which means if you like Obamacare so much, you go first. There's no exemptions. Right. You like government schools so much, you go first. That's one. Mm-hmm. Number two would be no bill longer than the U.S. Constitution, which is only about 35 pages in my little pocket edition. And number three, what I call the Mission Impossible clause. Every law that is passed has a sunset on it. And if it does the opposite of its name, everybody who voted for it must resign, and the law itself self-destructs like the old Mission Impossible tapes. Those would be three good political, wouldn't those be good political reforms?
That would be great. You know, I use one where I say, you know, I have an uncle that loves to talk about how the rich need to pay more taxes. He's a multimillionaire. And so I called the IRS one day when we were having a conversation, and I said, if he wants to write a check to you guys out of his multi-million-dollar bank account, can he? Will you accept a check from him? And they said, absolutely. So, okay, celebrities, you think that people aren't paying enough money? Pony up. You first. You can write a check. You know, if you think you're not being taxed enough, then why don't you do it of your own free will and show us how it's done?
Absolutely. You know, I think, too, Christy Brown, this is what I think is going on in America. Obama has become so good at deflecting our attention. He is the media maestro like nobody else has ever been. We talk now about things that are so crazy. We talk about crazy stuff. We talk about climate change is the greatest threat in Paris on the heels of an attack in Paris. That is so insane that it must be a deflection so that we're not looking at what's really going on, like they spent almost $1 trillion in a month. They're borrowing more than $1 million a minute. So instead of looking at what's really important, we're talking about crazy stuff like this. Here's another crazy one. We don't debate illegal immigration anymore. We debate whether Syrian refugees by the tens of thousands can come to America, which, by the way, Daryl Day calls refugee jihadists, is what he's dubbed them. But the conversation is so insane. It's about Syrian refugees. It's not anymore a debate about abortion, Christy. It's a debate about chopping up baby parts, to which Democrats say it's okay as long as you don't make a profit on it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had a couple of conversations over the holiday weekend of people who I managed to sidestep most family debates, but people who were just asking me questions. And I said, you know, what's amazing to me is that you and I are the ones that are typically not in the mainstream. You know, most of the time, the option that actually makes the most sense if people took the parties and the emotion out of it is somewhere in the middle, right? So should we fix the immigration problem? Absolutely. Is there one? Yeah, because if there's an 8-year waiting list when you try to follow the laws to get into the country, that means that something's broken. Right? But that doesn't mean you get to jump the border because something's broken. It means we need to fix what's broken, right? If my tax dollars are going to support abortion and you think that abortion should be perfectly legal, then there's a disconnect between what's happening in Washington and what the people think. I always go back to the minimum wage thing where we're constantly talking about the minimum wage only affects 2% of adults in America, instead of talking about what we can do to move those people out of minimum wage jobs so that we don't have to have this conversation and high school students and people that are looking for part-time work to supplement an income that already comes into their family can still have jobs, which they won't if we continue to raise the minimum wage. But nobody talks about those in-between things. Nobody comes out and says, okay, it's immigration, the system is broken, and that needs to be what's fixed, so then we can fix the people that are jumping over the border in Mexico. Or it doesn't need to take. Why does it take 18 months to do background checks on Syrian refugees? It shouldn't take that long. It doesn't when you're getting a top secret clearance. So why does it take that long when you're, there's something that's broken, so it's not either or. It's not they all get to come in without background checks or they don't get to come in at all. They're somewhere in the middle, and it doesn't seem like politicians ever know that or make anybody aware of that.
And Christy, I think this goes to when I always point to allegiance. What is their allegiance to the people who have these conversations with you? I'm telling you, it's not to the truth. Their allegiance is to a team. It's to a political party, which is why none of these things make sense. You talk about immigration. I hear, this is another superpower, by the way, of Barack Obama. He's been able to illegal immigration was something that was political suicide if you supported before Barack Obama became the president. Now, Republicans call for it. I mean, the way he changes things is unbelievable. And Republicans like Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, they say things like, well, the system is broken and we've got to bring him out of the shadows, to which, I say, you're actually broken and you need to come out of the shadows. And with regard to minimum wage, I think we need to tell people, because they're really good at saying, well, we want to give them a raise, to 10 an hour. And I think what we need to say is the truth, and that is minimum wage is not giving people a raise. Minimum wage criminalizes jobs, and it bans work up to a certain figure, an arbitrary figure set by politicians. Minimum wage criminalizes jobs. How does that help an economy?
It doesn't. And if you look back at what minimum wage was created for, it was because Roosevelt wanted to drive kids out of their houses and out of the imbecile immigrant homes, that's what he called them, and into government-run schools. And so he made it so that kids and teenagers couldn't get jobs. That was his whole program in actually creating the minimum wage, was because he didn't think that parents should be able to educate their kids, or that kids should learn a work ethic at a young age. And so he used it as child labor laws, which of course you're just inhuman now if you think that children should work. And I mean, of course that can be debated. But the agenda was not, let's protect people. That is not how that came about.
No, exactly. It was used to keep people out. It was used. What it does, as we said, it criminalizes jobs up to a certain point. It really discriminates against the least skilled workers among us, because, and I also think that we should tell people what is a wage. Let's start the story at the beginning. A wage is simply the price at which you can sell your labor. That's what it is. And if you can't sell your labor at what it's worth, like I don't even have it anymore. I used to talk about it. I had this old TV, Christy, about 9 months ago, and it was it was one of those tube TVs. So it was deeper than the screen was wide. I had to keep it like 3 feet away from my wall. This big TV, and I wanted to sell it. I wanted to sell this 27-inch screen TV that I had to keep 3 feet away from my wall. I wanted to sell it for $350, but guess what? Nobody would buy it because it wasn't worth $350. Well, that's very much like our labor. If we can't sell our labor to somebody, you can't automatically make the TV worth $350, and you can't make somebody's labor worth 10 an hour if all they can do is answer phones at this point.
Well, and I think, that's what's amazing to me is that, just the basic economic principles of, if you raise the bottom line of what it costs to do business, there is going to be a ripple effect, and there always is. So either things are going to get more expensive, or you're going to have to lay off people. You're going to not hire people for those part-time jobs. So now the people working full-time are going to be doing several different jobs. There's always that ripple effect. When you talk to people that support, they just say, no, there's not. No, there's not. No, there's not. And you're like, okay, well, Australia and New Zealand are now backing off of these policies because people cannot afford to go through the drive-thru at McDonald's anymore because a Happy Meal is $8. That's the actual fact. So you can say, no, it's not, but they actually don't have any kind of economic philosophy to back it up other than they're compassionate and we're just greedy.
That's exactly what they say. Christy, what are you making of what Obama is doing with the saber rattling with Putin and Syria? I mean, now he's telling Putin, you better be careful, better learn your lesson from Afghanistan before. So he's warning Putin to remember the lessons of Afghanistan before getting involved with Syria. We now have declassified documents, thanks to Judicial Watch, that Obama ordered the CIA to train ISIS. So he knew about this. They were training ISIS in 2012, and he encouraged it so that they could help bring down Assad and Syria, something Obama said we should never do when he was running for office in 2008, which goes back to my point, whether Obama is against war or whether he's for war, whether he's against meddling in other countries' civil wars or being involved in other countries' civil wars. It doesn't matter what he does. They support him like nincompoop bobbleheads. Why do they do that?
I'm not sure. I said when I first heard about Obama saying that to Putin and remember what happened in Afghanistan, my first thought was, remember what happened in Iraq? This policy does not stabilize anybody. It doesn't allow us to pull any troops home. All it does is create more and more chaos and more death around the world. Why do we think it's going to be different this time than it's ever been? I don't understand. Like, how dare him, actually, I think, try to bully Putin, because Putin has several times now made Obama look like a weak, just totally incompetent leader. And so now he's got to stand up to Putin, but he's doing it in a way that, quite frankly, is scary. I don't want to start a war with Russia, and Putin's not somebody that I think that we should be trying to make an enemy of. And he actually is going after ISIS. So I really don't understand what's happening in the tug of war there, other than Obama's thinking about his legacy, and he doesn't want to be remembered as an incompetent leader that allowed Putin to show him up.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, do you ever feel like we're living in Oceania? You know, from 1984, yeah. You know, that was the continent in 1984, and it was like perpetual war. And Obama's policy, and everybody knows it. Again, I think Democrats know this. They just hate Republicans more than they love America, so they defend him. They know that he has no strategy in Syria, that we shouldn't be in Syria. They know this. But, and you're right. I take a look at Putin. I take a look at Obama. And it scares the ever-living out of me. They've got a leader who rides horses bareback and punches bears right in the mouth. We've got, like, Urkel on a 10-speed with a helmet, you know, safety first, safety first. I mean, that's what it looks like. Obama riding around in his jeans with a little bell, safety first, boys and girls. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, it's amazing to me. You know, one of the things that I have said, too, is that, you know, and this makes me sound like I'm totally just lacking any kind of compassion, but how come there are so many young men from Syria that are leaving Syria, and we are supposed to send our men to go fight for the land that they're fleeing from? How come they can't stand and fight? If it's really as bad as what we're being told, and people are really standing in their backyards trying to take over their country, how come these men that are 23% of the refugees, the 17 to 40-year-olds, aren't standing to fight for their own country? And the answer is because the U.S. has always done it for them, so why should they now? Why should they risk their lives if we're going to risk ours? If we're going to foot the bill, why should they?
You know, exactly, and that's why I always go back to a foreign policy that Thomas Jefferson promoted, and that is that we should be friends of liberty everywhere, but defenders only of our own. That's the truth. And I'll tell you what else. I think Putin's right about ISIS, or Obama's ISILs. He likes to call them ISIL. So I think he's right about Obama's ISILs. They are his mercenaries, in a sense.
Yes.
We've trained them. We've armed them. Not just him either. The Republicans, Boehner's Republicans did it too. They funded them. And it's unconscionable. They have blood on their hands for it. But I think what's happening is, if we understand what ISIS stated goals are, they want to be the big dog of the Middle East. They call it the caliphate. And the only thing stopping them from being the big dog of the Middle East is Iran, is Syria, is Jordan, is Egypt. These countries would decimate ISIS if the United States would stop running cover for them.
Right, get out of the way. Yeah, I mean, that's what, when I tried to do, you know, I always play connect the dots. And it really does appear, as conspiracy theory as it sounds, that the Taliban has now kind of been consumed by ISIS. And before the classified documents came out that actually showed that the CIA had armed and trained them, that's exactly what it looks like. If you just take a step back for a second, regardless of your foreign policy, and just look at and connect the dots to where ISIS came from and kind of the ties, and some of the names that we have are some of the same names that we had of Taliban members. And we know where the Taliban came from. You know, we've known that for years. So why is it so unbelievable to think that that's where ISIS came from? And then, you know, who is responsible? Because, I mean, at what point does somebody actually have to step up and this be crimes against humanity and war crimes that we're arming other countries that now are causing a refugee crisis that's, you know, ruining countries around the world? I mean, Germany is having a field day with all the refugees that are coming over. They're complaining about being cold now when they were just trying to be nice. You know, it's caused this ripple effect around the world, and it's our foreign policy that's doing that, and nobody's responsible. There's no accountability at all.
No, that's exactly right. No accountability at all, and there are consequences everywhere. Christy, we are out of time. Christy Brown, I almost said out of Jacksonville, but I think it's out of Orlando now. Is that right?
Yes, it is out of Orlando.
All right, Christy Brown, I love your point of view. Thank you so much for being a friend of the show.
Thanks, Bernie.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. All right, and I love the phone. I got to tell you what, I have a friend of mine who sent me a picture of Oscar Goldman from the TV series The $6 Million Man, and he was sitting in the back of his limo with the black phone, and it's just going to be part of the show. But I tell you, I'm tweeting some of this stuff, and I hope that you get a chance to look at it, like the story that Judicial Watch, government watchdog Judicial Watch, just came out and published more than 100 pages of formally classified documents from the U.S. Department of Defense and the State Department, obtained through a federal lawsuit, revealed that agencies earlier the views on ISIS, namely that they were a desirable presence. Obama found them to be a desirable presence in Syria until recently. So they really are Obama's ISILs. And Obama really did want to unseat Assad, something he said he would not want to do if he were elected in 2008. Democrats cheered then, Democrats cheer now. It doesn't matter to Democrats. Why? Say it together. Because they hate Republicans more than they love America. And the constant chaos and the constant over-the-top stories and the focus on climate change is to deflect our attention away from the real crimes and corruption emanating from not only the White House, but also Congress. And guess what? Like rubes at a circus, we're falling for the Bolshevik. Am I right or wrong? Can I get an amen? All right, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you for being with us, and I will see you tomorrow right here on My Freedom Radio on YouTube, on Fox 28, and, of course, on Periscope. Whew. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you tomorrow.